Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Don't Let Age Discrimination Win, How to Compete with Younger Workers for Jobs. My name is Jeff Murphy. I'm an Associate Director in the BU Alumni Relations Office, as well as a proud alumnus of the BU Questrom School of Business. Today's webinar is sponsored by the BU Alumni Association and is offered as part of our Alumni Career Weeks series, where we presented 31 career events in the month of March in cities around the world and online. Throughout your career, the BU Alumni Association is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. We aim to do this by providing alumni with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. It's important that we get your opinion on how we're doing, so we very much look forward to receiving your feedback via a survey that will be emailed to you at the end of this week. I know we have alumni joining us today from near and far, with alumni coming in from the UK, Canada, and in US cities like DC, Santa Monica, California, and of course dozens of alumni here in Massachusetts. For each and every one of you out there, please know that we really do value your opinion on this and every program we offer. Before I introduce today's speaker, some brief housekeeping notes. As you know by now, this webinar is being hosted on the Adobe Connect online meeting platform. If you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of today's presentation, I'll ask that you please contact Adobe Connect directly. I'll give you their number if you want to jot it down. It's 1-800-422-3623. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni Association website found at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions that you have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A chat box you should see at the bottom of your screen. We hope to get to as many questions as we can during today's webinar. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day. Presenting from Miami, Florida is College of Arts and Sciences alumnus Scott Singer. During almost 2 decades of in-house corporate HR and staffing firm experience, Scott Singer brought his knowledge, skill, and talents to national and international corporations in a diverse range of industries. Now, as founder and president of Insider Career Strategies, LLC, Scott regularly guides individual and corporate clients through the job search and hiring process, consulting on everything from resume writing and interview coaching to developing LinkedIn profiles and helping professionals manage their image. Scott brings unique insight into what employers want and need in terms of talent evaluation, drawing on his time with major corporations such as Motorola, Ryder, Bacardi, Burger King, and LVMH. His straightforward advice and understanding of the other side provides a direct path towards career growth and success. Scott, thanks very much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get your slide deck up and running. It might take a second before you see the you do. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Really appreciate you joining us. Jeffrey, does this sound okay?
It sounds perfect.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, everyone. I do want this to be interactive. If you have questions, there is a Q&A box. Please feel free to type in your questions as we go along. Otherwise, we will tackle them at the end. Also, at the end, I will tell everyone about an opportunity to help yourself while helping the university at the same time. So, anyway, thank you for joining us. This is about Don't Let Age Discrimination Win, How to Compete with Younger Workers for Jobs. And in case you're wondering, who is this guy on the other end of the phone, besides what Jeffrey's told you? I am the president of Insider Career Strategies, so I am a certified professional resume writer, as well as a career coach, as well as a talent acquisition consultant. So I help small to medium-sized companies with their recruitment strategies. As Jeff mentioned, I am an alumnus of BU, although it wasn't called College of Arts and Sciences in those days. That's a giveaway that I'm over 40, but it used to be the College of Liberal Arts. And I also got my MBA from University of Michigan, Dearborn. And I've been a professional recruiter for 19 years. For the last year, I've been doing the coaching and the resume work, and I'm thrilled to be here today. So let me start off with a disclaimer. First of all, this presentation is intended to help individuals prepare for and overcome potential biases in the job search. What this is not about how to get retribution in case something happens. This is more about how to proactively avoid discrimination in your job search, rather than what to do when experiencing it. And I should make abundantly clear, I am not an attorney. If you think something pretty egregious or serious has happened and you need legal advice, I do encourage you to speak with a lawyer. But what this presentation is about helping you develop strategies to compete in the job market, even if you maybe have a few gray hairs on your head. So a few statistics. Let's start out. The workforce is getting older, and as far as I'm sure everybody knows, employees are working longer. In as far as the numbers, by the year 2022, so only 6 years from now, of the folks that are 65 to 74, over 31% are anticipated to be projected working. And if you think about that, that means that folks are going to need to be staying into the workforce longer. And as far as the numbers, they are going up. For ages 55 to 64, and by the year 2022, since 92, it'll have gone up to 68%. So it is there is a jump going on, and what's happening is that there are several reasons that people are working longer. Number one is improved health. People are able to work longer, so they are. The other factors are there's reduced federal entitlements, fewer pensions. There's not as many, Social Security is one of those things that Congress has pushed back the age a little bit, and less companies are providing pensions, and they're going more towards individual contributions through 401ks and other devices like that. But there's also the inherent reasons, which are that people want to be productive for a longer period of time, and there's people that can't afford not to. The cost of living does continue to increase at about a 2 to 3% clip annually, and if you're on if you're in a situation where you're on a fixed income, you're going to need to continue to work. Likewise, it's just something that a lot more people are doing. So let's talk about ageism. And ageism is discrimination against folks that are older. Federal law is the good news is that federal law is on your side. It does forbid discrimination in employment for individuals over 40 years of age. And if you are over 40, you are protected in hiring, firing, layoffs, as well as compensation. So the idea being that you should be treated the same as someone who is under 40. Many years ago, back in 2004, I was laid off from Motorola. Although I wasn't over 40 at the time, they did have documentation that basically showed that they were treating folks that were over 40 without any disparate impact. They wanted to make sure that they were handling the layoffs in such a way that it's being handled basically without regard to age. So the federal law also covers harassment, basically folks that are treating you in such a way that because of your age, as well as I thought this was a very enlightening statistic. 64% of workers say that they have seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. And, I want to be very straight about this. It does exist. Ageism does exist. Age discrimination exists. People are staying in the workforce longer, and it's not very easy to cover up the fact that you are getting older. And we'll get into some more of the reasons as terms of why people may be discriminated against. But the truth of the matter is that it is very, very real. And it could be something as simple as somebody saying that you don't have the energy level to compete with today's workforce to other factors as well. So the real strategy here today is about modernizing yourself. And as far as the approach that I'm advocating today is, rather than letting the job market get you down, compete and do things. There are things that you can do within your control to try to compete. So, first of all, you need to know who you're competing against. And what's happened is that in the workforce, it's become a very skill-based type of thing. Knowledge work is something that still exists, but it's very much about the skills that you bring. And people and companies, employers, hiring managers may be looking at you against the certain different demographics, and they'll be looking at you against recent graduates. And the truth of the matter is, younger, lower-paid professionals. Someone who is coming straight out of college is probably going to get a smaller salary than someone who's been around for a while. So even though in the old days it used to be great, you'd stick around at a company for 20 years, you'd get your annual 3% increase, and then you compound that with promotions and other sort of adjustments, it would be a great advantage and you'd have a wonderful check. However, if you are, all things being equal, and your skills are about the same as an individual who's coming recently out of school or just a couple of years, and your salary is twice as much, the company is going to make an economic decision. So you need to understand who you're dealing with. And you need to understand what the negative interviewer biases are. In other words, if you are a little bit older, how is an employer going to perceive you? And I'm just kind of curious if anybody in the room has experienced some of these in terms of feedback. If you've interviewed for a job and a company has given you this feedback, I'd love to hear back from you. But the things that you'll typically hear are these are code words. The individual can't keep up. You're not current on today's technology and the way that things are done. Salary expectations are too high, or you're stuck in your ways. The truth of the matter is that we are creatures of habit. People are creatures of habit. It's very easy to get stuck in the way that you've always done things and the way that always have perceived. However, the way that people talk about work changes, the things that you do on a day-to-day basis changes, and the vocabulary and the action items around it change. So there are a lot of things to keep in mind in terms of how it impacts you as a job seeker. And your goal is to leave no doubt that you can keep up. You want to build for yourself a whole package that removes the negative bias. In other words, can you portray yourself in such a way that these negative biases do not matter? All right, so let's talk about the job search today. And what's happening is that you are often today competing with over 250 of other job applicants for the same job. Jeff, can we put up the first poll question? So we have a poll question, which is, how responsive are employers to my job application? And I'd love everyone's responses to this. Option 1, great. I've got more interviews than I can shake a stick at. Option 2, it's been slow. Sometimes I get a response from employers. Or option 3, hello, I did send my resume, right? All right, so it looks like we're not getting anybody that can shake more interviews than they can shake a stick at. We have about 70% of the folks saying that their interview is getting lost in the dark, and then another 30% are saying it's been pretty slow. So let's go ahead and let's end this poll. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about the reality of what it's like to search for a job today. It used to be a very paper-driven process. And it used to be you would look up, in the old days, you would find an address, you would go ahead, get some really nice vellum paper, print up a resume and a cover letter and send it off. It's not the same today. The barrier to entry is a lot lower, and what's happened is it's become much more automated. So as I said, you are competing with over 250 other job applicants for the same job. In fact, if you go on to places like Indeed and LinkedIn, you will actually see how many people have applied for the same position. So as you are going through that process, it's very systems driven. What's happening is that you need to be companies are looking for very specific criteria in a resume. In the old days, it used to be they're looking for somebody who's got a marketing background. Now, what'll happen is that since they want to get through those 250 resumes, they are going to look through the resumes, and they're going to have the computer do some of the search for them. Much as like when you're using Google to search through information, you'll put in more criteria to get more specific results. Recruiters use what's called an applicant tracking system. And if you ever wondered what that black hole is when you send a resume and you click send at the end online, that's what it goes into. It goes into a computer system that the recruiter is using. So what's happening is that they are using filters to get through there. So they don't want to look through 250 resumes. They're going to look through, probably put in enough filters so that they'll get to look through about 15, 20 resumes and try to get 3 to 5 that really are attractive for what they're looking for. So the other thing to keep in mind is that every recruiter is on LinkedIn these days. And you need to ask yourself, does your profile measure up, or do you even have a profile? It's actually surprising to me. I meet with a lot of clients working with them on their resumes or their LinkedIn profiles, and they don't even have a LinkedIn presence. And I hate to admit this, but what happens is that after a recruiter gets a resume, they are typically going to do an informal background check on you. It doesn't mean they're going to necessarily go ahead and send in and get your criminal background, but what they're going to do is they're going to do some cursory searching. And the first place that they're going to check is LinkedIn. They're going to want to make sure who's on the other end of the sending the resume. They want to make sure that your information on your resume is the same as what it is on your LinkedIn profile, that things correlate in terms of the dates, and they want to see a picture there. So you need to be aware of how your profile does appear. Then the other thing about the job search today is it is all about the networking. And when you are searching for a job these days, you need to be able to do as much as you can to reach out to folks. Networking has always been a part of the job search. The most effective job searchers have been the folks that have gotten out there and made connections. However, with tools like LinkedIn, it's become much easier as a job candidate to be able to find people that are out there that are contacts in the company, and you can utilize that to your advantage. So let's talk about how to do that. How exactly do you network your way to the interview? And this is very much today. This is how things work in 2016. There really are two steps these days to effectively apply for a job. Number one is you want to go ahead and apply online. And that means that you follow Indeed or Monster or Career Builder or wherever that it is that takes you to the job, and go through, fill out all the fields, and apply. But the next thing that you can do is you can go on LinkedIn. You can actually find a contact at LinkedIn through LinkedIn to reiterate your interest. So if you are interested in finding a position at Joe's Body Shop, and Joe's Body Shop is looking for an accounting manager, it's not that difficult to go on to LinkedIn, search Human Resources Manager or Operations Manager and Joe's Body Shop. You may need to subscribe to a more premium subscription, but what you'll be able to do is you will be able to identify a contact on LinkedIn that may be able to help get your resume to the top of the pile if you're appropriate. So sending a very brief note that says, hey, I've applied to the position online. Let me tell you very briefly about my background. I'd love the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you. You have to view this as you're presenting the recruiter or the company with a Christmas present. The idea being that you want to be able to have the perfect candidate drop in their lap. And I can tell you, as somebody that worked on the other side, somebody that worked as a recruiter, when I had an open position and somebody had gone through the effort, they applied, but they also reached out to me through LinkedIn and sent a brief note, the very next thing that I did was I looked up their application. Now, obviously, it's a question of whether or not they fit the criteria. That's certainly the next filter, but it's going to get you noticed, and it can only help your situation. So the other way that you can network to your way to an interview is to use what's called an informational interview. And an informational interview is something that is exactly what it sounds. So the thing about an informational interview is you're contacting someone in an organization and you are trying to find out information. You're not necessarily asking them for a job. In fact, you would be breaking the taboo to ask them specifically for a position. So if you are reaching out to a company and you can find someone at, if you wanted to work at General Motors, for example, you could go online, find a recruiter or an HR manager at General Motors, and send a note and say, hello, I would like to introduce myself. I am an accountant or an engineer. I am very interested in learning more about General Motors, learning more about the culture, and learning more about the company. And, if I can buy you a cup of coffee, I'd love the opportunity. And what you'll find is that a lot of folks at these organizations are actually very open to to this type of thing. People in general want to help, and the nice thing is that if you do very well in an informational interview, often what will happen is somebody will say, hey, listen, I may not have an opportunity in my department, but I know of a guy in another department that may have a need for your skill set, and they will go ahead and refer you along. So from an informational interview standpoint, it is something that I have seen lead to actual interviews and potential job offers. In fact, I've had it as a recruiter where I've had individuals reach out to me on an informational basis. They impressed me enough that we found a way to get them interviewed even without an opportunity in place. So it is a very valuable tool. Now let's talk about your resume. One of the things that you need to keep in mind is that your resume is a very telling document. The resume is, as you probably know, a document that tells about your work history, where you live, tells about your skill set, your education, and it's a very comprehensive document. And the way I refer to this with my clients is I refer to it as your brochure. What you're doing is you're selling yourself to a company. So think about there in your resume, there are a lot of tells on your resume that can give away your age. What your goal is to make sure that you are going to the top of the pile. You don't want to necessarily give an employer a reason not to consider you. And by the way, I've seen people do this where they include a photograph on your resume. Do not do that. That's not standard for the United States. In certain international markets, it is appropriate. But for the United States, that's not an appropriate way to do it. And the other thing is that it does is if you leave the picture off, it forces people to focus on what you bring to the table from a skill set and experience standpoint. So let's talk about the resume. First, you want to use a modern resume format, and there's a lot of great books out there that talk about what modern resume formats are. But in a nutshell, they're keyword driven, and I'm sure all of you have heard that phrase. It's a very popular phrase right now in terms of people saying that resumes are very keyword driven. And as I mentioned, what happens is that if you are sending your resume to a company and you go ahead and you send it in, and they've got 250 applicants, they're going to want to see that you have the right keywords. So if you want to make sure that you're using modern terminology, and I know this is an extreme example, but if you want to say you're using Excel versus using spreadsheets or using adding machines, there's a very different meaning. A spreadsheet is a very common tool. Excel is a very today tool. Adding machines is a very 1950s, 60s term for a calculator. So you want to make sure that you're not using any terminology that's going to give you away. Also think about this from a technology standpoint. So if there's a lot of people that work in IT, and as I'm sure if you work in IT, you know the technology changes every single year. And I'll give you an example. If you put on your resume that you did COBOL programming, COBOL, that's a very old skill. A lot of people aren't using it anymore. Usually what you see is that a lot of legacy systems in government organizations may use it, but just to keep up old systems. That's going to give away the fact that you've been in the job market for quite a while. If you're not using COBOL, if you're not current with it, leave it off your resume. Whereas if you're using Visual Basic, Visual C++, some of the more modern languages, those are keywords that are going to get you attention. By the way, the other thing is that companies do a very good job of telling you what their keywords are. So I always encourage people when they're applying to a job, print up a copy of the job description and go with a highlighter. You'll be able to tell what are the keywords that they're looking for, and make sure that in your resume that you have those keywords. The next thing is scannable, and what I mean by that is not necessarily feeding into a scanner. What I mean is that resume format today is less about long paragraphs and more about having 1 to 2 line sentences that you're able to just let people scan right through and kind of find what the accomplishments are. The less you make people dig, the better. And I hate to say this, but we Americans are very, very impatient. The easier you can make it for someone to read it, the more they're going to be able to go through and quickly see what the skills are, as well as the accomplishments. And then targeted. So if you are applying for a job and the title is sales director and your resume says marketing manager, you want to make sure that you change the title on your resume. Otherwise, you probably won't get considered because it's not a match. So let's talk about things from an age standpoint and a discrimination standpoint. First, you want to use an appropriate email address. I've seen people do this where they use their name and their birth year and that at gmail.com in terms of an email address. That's not something, think about it. People are going to find those things in their in the resume. People will find ways to read into it. The other thing is make sure that you don't use anything that's going to be goofy or silly. Pop of 5 kids at gmail.com. Hockey fan at gmail.com. Things that are going to give away that it's not most professional. You want to have something that's professional and neutral. Usually your name and a number that is assigned, like, for me it would be scottcsinger at gmail.com or scott.singer at insidercs.com. Something that's neutral and doesn't really give much away other than my name. You want to have contemporary terminology, technology, and skills. We talked a little bit about that a few moments ago. It's all digital today. Try to keep in mind, sending a paper resume is probably not going to get you reviewed. And if you send a paper resume in response to a job advertisement, it's just an additional step because people are going to have to find a way to scan it or ask you to send an additional copy or to apply online. The only place that it's really appropriate to have a paper resume these days is for you to, number one, bring it to the interview, or number two is to bring it to a job fair. Obviously, if you're at a job fair and you're speaking to a great number of employers, it's not going to make sense for you to say, oh, I'll email you. What you want in that particular case is to have a paper resume that they're going to be able to review immediately and send in. And then also, you want to have an email-driven cover letter. The old format for a cover letter, and it still exists, is a full page, on nice stationery, where you're explaining all of your accomplishments and everything you've done and why people should read the resume. Cover letters are a different conversation, and what you're going to find is that a lot of people don't even read them. So what you want an email cover letter, something that is going to be short, something that will show up in the inbox in the first few lines, basically a short email. Hello, I'd like to introduce myself. I am a sales manager with 12 years of experience. I'd love the opportunity to speak with you. I can be reached at. That's really as much as you want to have, something that's going to show up in the inbox and not bury itself. People are spending less and less time reviewing a resume. In fact, they are going to spend probably somewhere between 15 and 20 seconds looking at your resume and cover letter. So try not to chew up too much time if you don't have to. And then this is an important thing about your resume. You want to make sure to use dates appropriately and recently. So what I mean by this is if you have early jobs, so if you have positions that are no longer applicable, if you're far enough down the road, you've changed a couple of employers, and you have the ability to leave off older employers, leave those jobs out. All it's going to do is let people calculate your age. The other thing is, although you may be proud of having graduated BU in 1975, leave the year off, put the degree in, make sure you know the modern name for the school. Like I said, for me, I was graduate of College of Liberal Arts. It's now called College of Arts and Sciences. I want to make sure that I have College of Arts and Sciences on the resume, but leave the dates out if you don't have to put them in. Obviously, for the most recent jobs, you want to leave those in, but what people are going to look at is they're most concerned with what have you done for the last 7 to 10 years. And if you can illustrate those, then you're going to be okay. The other question that a lot of people ask is how long should the resume be? The standard these days is 1 to 2 pages. 2 pages if you have enough to say. 1 page if you can fit it all in one. 2 pages is okay, but you really don't want to go much beyond that. All right, so let's talk about the LinkedIn profile. First of all, that's my LinkedIn profile picture. Jeffrey, can we put up the next poll? So the next poll is, how appropriate is my LinkedIn picture? A, it's great. I'm in a suit and I look very professional. B, not bad. Just got my bangs colored. Do you like it? Or C, it hurts to look at. Ow! So watching those results come in, we have a couple of honest folks that feel that their profile picture is not appropriate. Let's talk about what is appropriate and what's not. Let's just give this another moment for the results to come in. All right, so it looks like about 82% feel that their profile picture is appropriate, 85%. About 9.7% say it's okay, and another 4% say they'd probably rather not have their LinkedIn profile picture up there. Thank you, Jeff. So let's talk about the LinkedIn profile. Number one, you want to make sure that your photo is a simple headshot. And what I mean by a headshot is that you want to have basically it's from the upper chest upward. You want to dress professionally. You want to look your best and your most vibrant. If that means using a softer lens, go ahead and do that. But the bottom line is you want to avoid unprofessional pictures. If you have a picture of yourself in Vegas with a beer in your hand, that's probably not the best picture to have there. If you got a picture with your family, again, that's something that's a little more appropriate for Facebook. What you want to have is you want to have something that's very clean and professional. And what will happen is that most companies, when you come in, will take a picture for your badge. If you have access to that picture that usually is used as your email avatar, feel free to take that. Otherwise, it might be worthwhile to actually pay for a professional photographer to take your picture for your profile. The picture is one of those things that most people do look at, and I can tell you that when, as a recruiter, if you're looking at a LinkedIn profile and there's no photo associated with it, people question how valid the profile is. How fair or unfair that is really a different topic to be debated, but you definitely want to have a picture and have it be your most professional. As far as your data, you want to fill in your fields. You want to fill in as much as you can, because the more data that you have there, the more of your recent positions, the more that you filled in terms of your skills and your patents and your projects, the higher you're going to come up on the search results. This is something that most people don't know, but every recruiter out there right now is using LinkedIn as a recruitment tool. In other words, they are combing the system, looking for profiles of passive job seekers, of folks that are looking for, that may be open and receptive to an opportunity. So the more complete that your profile is, the higher it can go. But companies are spending about $7,000 a seat to be able to see everybody that's in the system. If you think you've got privacy on LinkedIn, you're probably mistaken. It's one of those things where companies can and do pay to see everybody in the system. So the best thing you can do is make sure that you're presenting yourself the best way you can. Leave the dates off your degree and leave out early jobs if it's appropriate. If your early positions have nothing to do with what you're doing today, or if they're just so long ago and you've changed positions since then, leave them off. The more that you can do to make yourself look a little more current, the better. All right, so let's talk about dress. You want to dress for success. You want to ask yourself, how contemporary is your interview attire? And you want to really think about this. I had a kind of a moment myself last week where I was getting dressed and going to do a speaking engagement. My wife said to me, it's time for you to invest in some new suits. And there were too many buttons, the lapel's a little too high. You want to make sure that you're wearing modern attire to the interview. You want to let the staff at a department store recommend an outfit for you. The folks at Macy's are wonderful. If you go to Men's Warehouse or any of these other professional attire retailers, they will help you get attired appropriately. And as far as the suit, you really want to rely on their judgment in terms of what's contemporary. When I say contemporary, you want something that's contemporary, not necessarily cutting edge. There is such a thing as a suit that's going to last about 5 years in terms of fashionability. So you want to make sure to kind of hit that edge. But don't let also the color and style of your suit, skirt, or dress give away your age. If you are attached to suits from the 80s, it's probably time to refresh that wardrobe. And I know it's hard to change that stuff, but it's sometimes something that'll give you away. The other thing is that you want to avoid any cues that you're up to date. I am guilty of this. I have a beard, but I also work for myself. So it's not really as important for me in terms of making that impression for the interview. But the one thing that's unfortunate is my beard has a lot of gray hair in it. So if I was to go interview with a company, I would probably have to shave it off. And I wouldn't have to, but the fact of the matter is, if I don't want people to necessarily assume that I look 10 years older than I do, I would need to shave it off. And this was given away from me. I went to a restaurant recently and was offered the senior discount, and I guess I hadn't shaved for a while. So just be aware. What's the cue? The other thing is that neckties are a real giveaway. Neckties are very much of the moment, and if you've got an old style pattern or an old style width, it's going to tell how old you are, or at least when you purchased the necktie. And current hairstyle. Trust your hairdresser. They know what's in right now. So let's talk about body language and nonverbal cues. This is something that a lot of people don't think about, but the energy that you display in the interview is really going to give some things away. So you want to display a lot of positive energy. You want to be engaged. You want to lean slightly forward. You want to make a lot of eye contact, smile, have a firm, appropriate handshake, as well as an energetic speech pattern. And what I mean by that is you don't want to sound slow and reserved. You don't want to sound overly thoughtful. You want to, come out and say, yes, I absolutely am interested. I have a great level of energy and I can do this job and I'm looking forward to it. This is something I've run into quite a bit. Even if you've been the boss before, don't act like it during the interview. I was talking about informational interviews recently, and I had an individual who I had done an informational interview with some time back, and he had been a chief executive of a supply company, a yard supply company. And he came in, he interviewed with me, and he looked totally relaxed. Looked like he was in charge of the room. He had sat back. He was totally relaxed. Was pretty mellow actually. And I pointed out to him that in terms of your body language, you don't look terribly engaged. And I've had this situation myself where I've interviewed for a position where I thought because I had a lot of experience, well, I know a lot of things, I don't necessarily need to jump out of my seat. The truth of the matter is employers do want to see a lot of enthusiasm. They want to see that you're excited, that you're engaged. And, the last thing they want to see is that you look like you're in charge or reserved and not that interested or engaged. So during the interview, let's talk about this. You want to give behavioral examples that show that you're a great hire. You want to show things that, for example, that you've been able to meet an impossible deadline, that you've rallied a team around meeting a time-sensitive task, managed substantial volumes of work, that you've trained and developed your team to be successful, and that you use the latest technology. If there's a common theme here, it's all about currency, and it's about how you're able to keep up and to be able to keep up with what's going on in the workforce. I know it's, one of the temptations are that if you've been in the workforce for a while, that you don't necessarily want to act like that you feel like you're 25 years old, but, you feel that people should respect what you bring to the table from a knowledge and experience standpoint. But what's going to happen is you still need to be able to show that you're going to be able to keep up with everybody and everything that's going on these days. Jeff, let's do the third poll. So we have a third interview poll question. I believe that my answers to interview questions are A, spot on, they address real situations I've resolved. B, I could use some practice, I need to work on my responses. Or C, I'd feel more comfortable talking about the bean pot than answering these questions. Give this a moment. All right. So the results are still coming in, but it looks like about 75% folks say that they could use a little bit of practice. And the truth of the matter is that, thank you, Jeff, the interview is a practice scenario. This is the type of thing that companies are doing what's called a behavioral interview. And a behavioral interview means that they're talking about real life situations that you've experienced in order to deal with future situations. So they want to see, how have you handled things in the past? How have you dealt with things? So the more that you can come up with real life examples, the better. There's always scenarios that you're going to be able to think of that project that you pulled out, the things that you've done. You want to have these ready at the end of your tip of your fingers. If you need to make just some brief notes on your in your notepad about the types of answers that you'd like to give, that's okay. In fact, it's often okay to ask, can I just have a moment to think about this when people ask you a question? Often what will happen is people will ask a behavioral interview question, and the whole point of it is not to see how badly you screwed up, but how you got out of a situation or how you resolved it. So in your answers, you want to demonstrate an eagerness to learn, modesty. Modesty is an important thing. They want to show that you've got a lot of energy, but that you have some reserve about how you're able to deal with peaks, and you recognize that there's a lot of other folks that contribute to your success, and that you have a knowledge of the company lingo and culture. In fact, before any interview, you should be doing your research on a company to find out as much as you can. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to take questions. Just a couple things that I'd like to mention. My contact information follows. You can also see my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to connect with me. I do offer resume writing. I do LinkedIn profiles as well as career coaching. And I had mentioned at the beginning that there is something I'd like to offer to where you can help yourself and help be you, which is anybody that's on this workshop today, if you do engage me for a resume or a LinkedIn profile, I will make a $25 donation in your name to Boston University. So thank you, and I'd like to open the floor up to any questions that we may have.
Scott, thanks so much, and thank you for that amazing offer that you're doing for Boston University. I know that the university counts on donations, so I know that you'll have some great impact. So thank you for making that offer. We do have some great questions that are coming in, and I want to remind folks to go ahead and type those in. Some of you have done a great job of keeping them short. If you can try to keep your question under a sentence for me, that's really helpful. And while those are coming in, I also want to point out, Scott, you did a great job of talking about how just some of the processes have changed about applying for jobs. You talked a lot about the importance of building a strong network, and I want to point out to our alumni that we've got some great previously recorded webinars that cover those exact topics about how to build a strong BU alumni network using LinkedIn, how to craft a 30-second pitch that resonates with whoever you're talking to. And I also just want to say nuts and bolts. A couple of you are using the raise your hand feature to ask a question. That's not how I can obtain your question. Please type it into the Q&A chat box. Scott, we have a ton, so I'm glad that you left a few seconds here. The first one came in at kind of an early stage during your talk, and I think is a great way to sort of refocus us on a big 30,000-foot view. With our healthier aging population and also laws to protect against ageism, why haven't more employers figured out that they need older workers to access the whole candidate pool and get experienced hires who are available? I feel like you touched on this a little bit, but is it higher pay that's holding companies back from hiring more experienced workers? If you had to sort of boil it down, what is it that you think, why aren't companies hiring more older employees?
That's a great question. That's a really great question and a very thoughtful one. I think a lot of it has to do with company philosophy and the pace of the company. I think that what happens is that folks that are a little bit more senior don't necessarily show the energy that a young employee shows. It's like going to a car dealer. If you find a car that's got a few thousand miles on it versus one that's got 50,000 miles on it, which one is going to be more attractive? You want the newer, shinier, more model. But the other thing is that a lot of managers, this is an important thing to keep in mind. A lot of younger folks have become managers. If you've got somebody who's a 25-year-old manager, are they going to feel more comfortable managing and giving direction to somebody who is younger than them, the same age as them, or older than them? So part of it is how can someone take orders from someone who's younger? Quite frankly, some managers are very afraid of that. And, the more an individual can show that they're flexible and more dynamic and the ability to keep up, it's important. Now, of course, the salary is an issue. And the whole salary negotiation game has changed quite a bit. And that's a different topic for a different day. But, what's happened is that companies have gotten much more in terms of pigeonholed in terms of what is a salary that they will consider for a job. So it used to be much more candidate driven, where they said, hey, we've got a range, we find the right candidate, let's pay the whatever the right amount is. Now what's happening is they've taken a much more direct approach, where they say, hey, the range for this job is X dollars, and it just so happens that a lot of older, more seasoned employees are going to be having earned higher amounts.
Scott, we have a ton of questions that are coming in, and they're all really, really good ones. So we'll probably end up skipping around if you
Sure.
don't mind. Another question that came in as we were on some of your slides about resumes. Had you made a comment about changing your title retroactively? This person maybe didn't understand something you said about, as you're listing titles at previous employers.
No, not necessarily changing your title retroactively, although there are solutions around that. What I meant more was in terms of leaving off older positions if you have an option to do that. However, if you do have, this is actually an interesting point, because what will happen is that often a company will have a job title that's very specific to their own company and culture. Often what you can do is you can put like a slash after your job title and then put a more current title after it. So like in a lot of companies, they'll say project manager, and if your job is dealing with multimedia, you can put project manager / multimedia. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that definitely help clarify what you had commented on before. Melissa asked a question that we've also gotten a couple other times from other participants, and so I'm going to sort of combine this question into a couple, but it's a really good one. You talked a lot about sort of leaving off previous jobs where it makes sense, but what if your very early jobs were really compelling? You worked for an impressive Fortune 500 company. If you feel like those are going to add a lot of value to your resume, how do you navigate that?
That's a really, really good question. There are different ways to do it. Without getting into too much detail about how to write a resume, let's say you started out at a really impressive company, and then you kind of took a detour, went to some small companies, and then went back to a bigger one. You can actually categorize that on your resume as a separate category. So basically, go back 10 years on your most recent positions, and then put a separate category, additional relevant experience, and then put that original company in there, but leave the dates off on that original company. It's kind of a different way to portray it.
Really good question came in from Peter. He noted that some online applications don't allow you to complete the application without filling all fields, including dates. And so in that particular circumstance, how do you not out yourself as being an older worker?
Okay, so that's really a great question, and part of what there's multiple layers to this. So first of all, I want to just explain one thing. Sometimes companies will ask you for your date of birth when you're applying online. What that's for is that's in case they want to run the background check in the future. Often what will happen is they have it all in the system. Usually that data is sequestered, so it's not something that the recruiter will see. It's just something that they keep in a separate category. However, I think the more pressing issue is, you're going back to older positions and you're putting those in. The solution is to really leave off as much of the older positions as possible. It's not always avoidable. I mean, I have clients that have worked at the same company for 30 years. You can't leave those off. You have to be truthful in dealing with this. It's a judgment call. You have to decide when you can leave something off or when you can't.
Scott, you've set a record here. I've never gotten this many questions, so we'll try to get through as many as we can, and they're all really, really good ones. David has written in with a great point. You've obviously talked about the importance of a LinkedIn photo, and personally, I agree with you. I think when I see LinkedIn profiles that don't include a photo, you feel like it's not complete. But how do you avoid the obvious tell with your LinkedIn photo if you're somebody with gray hair, if you're somebody that's a little bit older? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer. I can tell you that I hired a very skilled photographer to take pictures for me. The best that you can do is the best you can do. I mean, you are who you are. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that your LinkedIn profile and your application takes a credibility if you don't have a picture on there. So I mean, I hate to even suggest things like this, but I mean, there may be things you want to do. I mean, coloring your hair or changing your hairstyle, just little cues. There are things you can control, things you can't. If you decide, hey, I don't care what people think, what I look like from skin deep, that's okay. But there are things you can do. So get that contemporary suit, get that contemporary tie, have a modern pose in terms of your photograph. Try to understand that everything is a risk reward. There's things you can change and things you can't, and you need to know what are the limits of what you can deal with.
Sayeda just asked along this topic, and I have strong feelings about it. Can you use an older photo for your LinkedIn profile?
I see no issue with it. I see no issue with it as long as it doesn't look particularly aged. I don't see an issue with it.
Great. I have to applaud Sylvia for looking at this whole topic with sort of a different lens. Instead of trying to hide your age to get an interview, what are the best ways to identify organizations who are friendly and value more seasoned individuals?
That is a really good question. I think you need to start thinking about it from a sector standpoint. So there are certain sectors that you're going to find that tend to be a little more receptive to that. For example, the nonprofit sector, if you're working in the charity or education sector, they tend to be a little more flexible because they also recognize that the salary structure may not be the same as a Fortune 50 company. But also the other thing is that there are in every city multiple best companies to work lists, and by going and looking at those, you should be able to do some research on those. A lot of them will give some information in terms of some of the benefits that they have, and you should be able to read between the lines in terms of some of those. Companies that that offer a lot of work-life balance type of benefits may be better places to work. Companies that have strong mentorship programs generally tend to be very good ones to consider. But the best of companies tend to be good ones. Like, for example, here in Miami, the South Florida Business Journal publishes one every year. Florida Trend Magazine publishes one every year. Grains Magazine publishes those. So that's what I would consider. But I would also, like I said, consider as sectors the nonprofit and government areas.
I'm going to do another combo question. Alumni have asked a similar question. For those alumni out there who are a little bit older and maybe also have taken a break to stay home and raise families. Alexander has asked this. Lisa has asked this. Peter, who's been freelancing for 10 years, has asked this. How do you address those sort of big breaks on your resume in terms of gaps where maybe you weren't working or were working in a different industry? How do you address that?
I think that, all right, so there's what's legal and what you should think about doing. And I have a client who's actually like that recently, and we discussed it, and the approach that we took was the head-on approach. He had been a stay-at-home parent for the last few years and, was looking to get back into the workforce. And we actually put as his most recent position, not in much detail, but just full-time parent, took time to deal with being a full-time parent. The thing is that you also need to think about what's the what's going to be the reaction. If you look like you're hiding something, people are going to dig at that. They're going to want to go deeper and they're going to question your honesty. So the more that you can put out there, the better. Now, again, I talked about what's legal. It's it really isn't anybody's business that you are a stay-at-home parent. But what it is, the question is, can it head off other questions and head off other issues? Now, if you've been a freelancer for 10 years, the question becomes one of how do you portray your work during that time? It's a lot of that is about showing your competencies. What kind of projects did you do? What kind of clients did you work with? Are you still able to show that you were working with and through organizations, able to build relationships and still able to sustain that type of thing? But I will tell you that anybody that's been out of the workforce, it's a special case. People like that need some additional guidance because the fact of the matter is there is going to be a bias regardless of whether or not you're older or not. Even if you're younger and you've been out of the workforce for a couple of years, like women that have been stay-at-home mothers, I mean, it's a challenge sometimes going back into the workforce and stepping back where you were.
Okay, Dan has asked a question. Could we please get some strategies for dispelling the expectation that I'm looking for a high salary?
Okay, so I'll give the bad news first and then the good news. The bad news is that every job applicant tracking system out there, when you go and apply for a job online, every company is asking you to put a number in there in terms of what you're looking for in terms of a salary. The bad news is that if you're forced to put in a number, it's a guessing game. Um, so you need to think about a number that's going to necessarily not attract a lot of negative attention. But from this, from the standpoint of if you are able to make a human contact, if you're able to connect with an individual, I think the important thing is there's certain points that you want to accentuate. Number one, that you really are just looking for an organization and a position that's a good fit for you. Any chance that you've got to send that message, the better. That you're looking for the right opportunity, that compensation is only a secondary factor for you. That's part of why, remember we were talking about, trying to shorten your resume to the last 7 to 10 years. If you show a resume that shows 20 years of experience, people are going to naturally think that you're looking for a higher level of compensation. If you're able to go back a little bit shorter on that, it's going to help. But I think the big thing is getting into the interview, really, if you have the opportunity to get into that interview, really being able to dispel that myth as much as you can and talking through it. It's not an easy topic. The salary discussion has changed so much in recent years, and it's become very challenging.
Scott, we have a couple questions about resumes, namely, how do you prioritize the sections of your resume? I'm wondering if you can sort of quickly go over the order that you tend to adapt most when you're writing resumes for folks. For example, is education more important than work experience? And then, we had another question. How do you sort of if you've got a longer resume, how do you what are some quick tips for prioritizing things that maybe you would have to cut out of a resume? I know that's kind of a long question.
No, but see, that's part of the value. I mean, I will say this, that's part of the value of hiring somebody else to do it, whether it's, a resume writer or even just getting a friend. Part of so there's two parts to this. Number one is how do you shorten it and how do you prioritize it? Let's talk about the priority first. If education is not a field that you're going into, so in other words, let's say that you're an over 40 and you've been working for several years, the proper order of a resume is going to be your name and address at the top, the title of the position and summary that you're looking for, then you go into experience, and then you put education after that. It doesn't matter if you've gone to Harvard or Stanford. You want to put the education after that because the experience is really what's most relevant. Whereas if you've recently graduated with a position, graduated recently from school, and you're looking for a position, then the education is going to go first. The other part of this was the how do you whittle it down and how do you prioritize? Well, let me back up 1 minute. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, the one exception to all this is academia. So if somebody has worked on and has a position where they're going to study to be a professor, that's a whole different ballgame. That's a curriculum vitae as opposed to a resume. Then you're going to put the education up towards top as well. And that's also an excuse to use 10, 20 pages. I mean, it's a different industry altogether. But as far as whittling it down, the real key on a resume these days is brevity, and it's part of what I do with my clients is I sit and I go through and I help them prioritize what are the most important accomplishments, and the real standard format these days is you have about 3 to 5 lines of what your responsibilities are, followed by 2-line bullets of your accomplishments, and getting an outside opinion on that is very helpful. And I know it's a hard task. We're all attached to what we've done in our career. There's no question about it. It's work that we've done, and it's a lot that we've contributed, and it's sometimes hard to make a decision about what to leave off. But what I can tell you is what's most recent is most relevant, and the bigger the impact, the better. And if there's little things that you have the opportunity to leave off, then I would certainly do that. But it's definitely a discussion that I would bounce off a second person.
Kathleen's got asking you to clarify a little bit more about what you said about cover letter versus email, and if you could just sort of revisit the mechanics of that and what situations where you should actually write a full letter versus just have that sort of quick email along with your resume.
Great question. So the letter is 90% of the time you're going to use just a brief email. You're going to do it in LinkedIn. You're going to do it through email. just something short and brief. The cover letter is very situation specific. Let's say your Uncle Louie got you in touch with somebody at a certain employer. You have a warm introduction. Therefore, you can go ahead and make that introduction, but you want to explain who you are and why you're contacting them. If you have a specific employer that you really, really, really have been dying to get in touch with, and you've managed to reach somebody and get a name of somebody, that's when a cover letter plays in. If you go to a job fair and you've recognized that there's 5 employers in particular that you want to really make an impression on, you pre-write cover letters for those employers and bring those with on the resume. That's when the cover letter matters, but no, the 90% of the time, a short email is going to suffice. People's patience isn't what it used to be.
We're running up against the hour, but Alexander has also asked an interesting question that I'd like to hear your take on.
Yeah.
Quite simply, are millennials uncomfortable hiring baby boomers?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It's age is definitely a factor. I think it's less about millennials than it is about hiring somebody who's significantly older than you are. It's a challenge. I can think back to a time when I was working at Ryder and I hired a recruiter who was a good 20 years my senior, and it was a different set of issues. Smart individual, very ambitious, but in terms of where he was in his life and what mattered to him in terms of the communication, and frankly, this was an individual who had more experience than me. It was intimidating in some ways. So yes, I think there is an issue in terms of that, and that's only going to continue as younger and younger folks continue to grow up the food chain and we get a little bit older.
Scott, we're right up against the hour. I want to thank you for your time. We have a couple questions, remaining questions from folks. Also, people wondering if they can get a copy of the slides. What would you say is the best way for people to follow up with you directly?
They can email me directly at scott.singer@insidercs.com, and I'd be more than happy to share with them any copy of the slides if they'd like them.
Awesome. I also want to mention, Scott, you've been a great contributor to our LinkedIn community. If people are not already, well, if you're not on LinkedIn, as we know, you definitely need to get on LinkedIn, but then make sure that you join the group Boston University Alumni. There are 34,000 alumni in that group, and Scott is pretty regularly posting interesting articles and tips on there, and that would be another great place to interact with Scott. Scott, as you were doing your presentation, I was just really struck how what you did today was a 5-minute presentation on 6 or 7 incredibly important pieces of the career and advancement and job search. And so just on behalf of the BU Alumni Association, I really want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And if anybody has any questions, they can absolutely feel free to reach out to me.
Great. And I want to thank everybody else for participating today and let everybody know we have 2 great webinars coming up in April. And we also have just recently launched a series of unique online speed networking events. So for those of you who maybe don't live in Boston and are looking to connect with BU alumni, it's a great way to do that. You can find out about all of our upcoming events on our website, again, at bu.edu/alumni. As always, if you or any BU alum you know would be interested in presenting a professional development webinar like this or have a topic that you'd like to showcase for the BU Alumni Association, feel free to contact me at the Alumni Relations Office or by email at J as in Jeff, T as in Thomas Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y, at bu.edu. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Have a great day or a great evening wherever you might be.